really familiar. Lockdown made us all really familiar with how it all works, but there's a chat box at the bottom of your video. You can always type any questions or comments that you have in that, and Sens and I will both be keeping an eye on it throughout the course of the hour. If you're not speaking, it would be great if you have your voice set to mute, because then that means that we don't have any background noise and it's a lot easier for us to hear each other. And of course, again, if you have any questions, just don't hesitate to give Sens a little shout on the chat box and he can answer them for you. Great. So with no further hesitation, so I'd like to welcome Jef today as our guest speaker. Jef is a Waka captain, an adventure guide, a long-term campaigner and activist who will be speaking about the topic of environmentalism and culture. This is a topic that we at Greenpeace have been wanting to delve more into and have start having bigger discussions on. So Jef, we're really excited to have you here today to be the one to kick off that process on these activist calls. And I will leave it to you to explain a bit more about who you are and what you're going to be talking about in the next hour. So over to you.
Tēnā tātou katoa, tuatahi me mihi atu ki a koutou katoa, I te hui hui nei, me te tuatahi ka tīmata mātou ki wetahi karakia. Tuputupu ake te Māori ka tū, tuputupu ake te Māori ka horo, horo horo nui, horo horo rangi. Ko tangaroa te ihi rangi, ko tangaroa te ihi moana. Ka tū kapa, ka māpuna uta, ka māpuna tai. Ki hai hoi rangi ka pauri ai te wā. Turua whakamau ai ki a tīna, tīna. Haumie huie, tai ki e. Ko wai au, ko tūmanako te maunga, ko parehia te awa, ko shiwathil te whenua, ko kahakura te waka, no Kanata me Norway o ku tūpuna mā. E noho ana au I te rohe o Ngāti Waihapu, ko Jef Murupaenga Ikenn, tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone. I'll hoodie here ki te reo tuarua. It's my first language as well, so we'll go with that. My name is Jef Murupaenga Ikenn, and first and foremost, thanks for having me on today to talk to you guys a little bit. I'm just going to put my pull tie back on because it's cold here with all the rain and the stuff, so if you don't mind. Yeah, so in terms of what I was going to talk about today, roughly speaking, I'm going to break it up into like 3 little parts. The first part is short. It's just a little intro to who I am, ko waio. And then the next part is looking at just the environment, like not the natural environment so much, but the environment in terms of the cultural environment versus the political environment. And then finally, which is hopefully what we'll spend a bit more time on, is talking about how we can fit in that crossroads of culture and environmentalism, and how we can be better active allies, and how we can basically work together and not be a drain on this fight against neoliberalism and colonialism and all that sort of stuff. So the caveats that I want to point out before I start is, first and foremost, I consider myself tauiwi. There's different names. I'm Pākehā as well in terms of that being non-Māori, but I say tauiwi because, as you'll find out, and if you understood some of my pepeha, I'm originally from overseas. I've grown up most of my life here, but I was up to a teenager. I was in Canada and a couple of years in the States, but raised in Canada. And so just so people know where my background is and where I come from, that was my background up until that point. And then you'll hear a little bit about what's happened since I've been here. And the second thing that I wanted to put out there before I say anything is that all of the stuff that I'm transferring into this recording and into this Zoom hui is based on my experiences only, and things that have been taught to me through my particular experiences. So there's always going to be people who might have a different experience. I'm not an expert. I can just talk about my experience, right? So maybe that means expert in comparison to someone else who has less experience, but I'll leave you guys to putting labels on stuff. So based on those things, I figure I'll get started. So first and foremost, ko waio, who am I? As you know, my name's Jef. I grew up in Canada and a little bit in America. I was this big nature guy. I was off in the mountains all the time. I was growing up in a place called Hope, BC. We had mountains and rivers and all sorts of stuff all around there. So I think I started out as a real sort of environmentalist nature kid, just, you know, just that's what I did. You know, a lot of us have been, you know, that sort of thing too. I was bored inside and always wanting to be outside and going off and exploring and adventuring. And now in my 40s, it's the same. So nothing's really changed on that front, just different adventures. So I had this idea when I was growing up that I was sort of too, to me at least, too big for the area that I was in, and I really wanted to branch out and get out. So I had been making plans at college or high school to try and get out, and I did that through university. I looked for programs that linked up overseas, that type of thing. And what I did is I got into university, started studying with courses that brought me into Australia and then to New Zealand, and then I finished here. So I arrived here around 16, that sort of stuff, 16 and a half, 17, with $100 in my push bike and in Wellington. And what ended up happening there is, as I based myself there, I was introduced to some people, and part of that introduction was because as a foreigner or as an immigrant, it was very normal and natural to me to basically, when I came into a country like Aotearoa, it's got, I mean, there are three languages, three national languages, right? Including obviously Te Reo Māori and English and New Zealand Sign. And I thought it was important to learn some of that. I mean, how do you, you know, incorporate yourself into a place? What better way to do that than to, you know, make an effort and learn some of the language. And through learning that language, it opened up a whole lot of doors that I never expected. So you'll see one of the most quintessential things that we can all do living in Aotearoa is to understand Te Reo Māori, me ona tikanga. I'll come back to that a little bit later. That includes pronunciation. So all those people that are mispronouncing things on the television and wherever, they need to work a little bit harder. It's actually very easy to pronounce once we understand the rules. But anyhow, so learning that sort of stuff, or going into signing up for some courses. This was back in like 2000, so, or even earlier than actually in the late 90s. So there wasn't a lot available. So I had to actively go and seek it out. And through that, I started to meet some people. I got invited by a man named Sean Allison to come and meet this kuya named Rose Pere, Rangi Māori e Turiki. And what was meant to be a weekend wānanga ended up to be about 3 months traveling around with her at different wānanga. And so that sort of started my journey, my huarahi reo, the road to the language. But also while I was in Wellington and picking up work, I was involved in the 3 a.m. collective, where we went out in the middle of the night and did, you know, activism stuff. We started Windy Media, which is a publication that's still being published today in Wellington. Aotearoa Independent Media, we set that up as a collective of activists down there. We were chaining ourselves to buildings that were in the way of the Te Aro bypass and all sorts of stuff. So back as a teenager, I was doing this stuff. So fast forwarding then, I moved from there up to the north. Oh, by the way, let me just pull back a second, because I haven't done this yet, but I actually have, rather than just me being a face on the screen the whole time, I thought it was going to be interesting, or more interesting, slightly more interesting, if I shared some pictures. So I actually have some pictures to share, and I'm going to try and, there we go, I'm sharing, right? And I think you guys can see that. Hopefully you can see that. Oh, I see what we have to do. So anyhow, there, that's what I wanted to do. That one. Yeah, bear with me. We'll start from the beginning. There we go. That was my pepeha. So things that I've been doing, like I am a guide. I do overseas motorbike trips. I've been a diver for forever, since like, I think 12 or 13 was my first couple of dives. Became a dive instructor, worked out on boats, became a skipper, that type of stuff. So that's where my background is. I've done work with Greenpeace, obviously, in the past. I've done youth work. I've been a skipper of the canoes, as Abby pointed out. And yes, then came here, Wellington for a long time, moved north to follow the dream to dive up here and do that work. And that's what I did. So met my partner up here as well. we've been involved. My partner is Māori. She's from Ngāti Kuri in Aotearoa, and she's listening in right now. She's like my checks and balances as well, in case I say something wrong or whatever. My timekeeper also. And so, yeah, so while we were in the north, we also, I mean, this was actually even before, part of it was before, well, 10 years before I met Catherine, but I was involved in, or I got involved in lots of different environmental activism from a Māori perspective. So we were, you know, fighting against deep sea drilling, mining, establishment of the prison at Ngāwha. So I was able to sort of pick up these experiences and learn what it's like to be tackling activism and social justice from an Indigenous perspective in Aotearoa. So lots of other things that I've done here. We've been a part of the Ahipara Taku Taimona Committee when we were living in Ahipara, which organized an anti-deep sea oil drilling concert, brought some acts to that and did some stalls. And we've been I've been part of some traditional whale flensing when the whales wash up on the beach. So a lot of the experiences, and these experiences opened up particularly and simply because my reo was at a point where Māori tend to see that and say, hey, this person is actually making an effort to understand sort of who we are or where we come from. And transitioning from me to that gets us into this concept of a cultural environment. And so in terms of a cultural environment, the best way to look at it from an elemental point of view that I've been taught and the way I see Māori existing in this sense is from a basis of something called tika, pono, and aroha. So for those of you who don't know, tika, pono, and aroha, what their meaning is, tika is what's right, pono is about what's true, and aroha, as we all know, can be love, but also from a sense of compassion. So an excellent tool right off the bat to figure out if you're doing the right thing or where you're coming from is to ask yourself, is it true? Is it right? And is it from a place of compassion? It's not the only thing you can do, but it's a great start. So I really use that as a guideline for me personally, and I know lots of Māori who do as well. I also want to say too that a lot of these concepts that I'll mention, we're talking for about what 45 minutes or something max, and you could have a wānanga on each and every one of these words, these kupu, these subjects, these topics. We can't do that here, but hopefully this is a start where people can say, oh, well, this is maybe something I need to learn more about. I'm totally open for people asking questions at the end. I'm hoping we have a bit of space for that too. But just bear in mind that I'm skimming over really quickly a whole lot of topics that deserve multi-days or even years of study. So just bear that in mind. So moving on from these photos that got stalled there, been involved in hikois and things like that. Indigenous activism, that type of stuff. Another thing that was really big that we did is we did an environmental journey on the Wakas for 2 years across the Pacific and back, sailing to different islands. But the canoes were celebrating traditional culture and navigation and that type of thing. But also we were looking at ocean acidification, ocean noise pollution, plastic pollutions, all types of different environmental aspects. So we looked at the Wakas as two hulls, and one of the hulls was the culture and the other side was the environmental impacts on the Pacific Ocean and the world at whole. So that was a really big, probably the biggest thing I've ever done in my life. And I was lucky enough to do that with about 100 other people for 2 years. It was pretty incredible. But yeah, coming back to these cultural values, I wanted to put this up, if you guys can all see this, and I don't need a show of hands, but what's important to me is that people understand that when I put this up, people should know really what this is and what it means. And I am going to go into it a little bit if you don't, but for those that don't know, what you're looking at right now is, sometimes it's called tikara, which just means like the flag. But this is a flag that represents something called Hifakaputanga, or Te Rangatiratanga, or Nutirini, which was established in 1835, signed in 1836, established in 1835. This flag that we're looking at right now was a legal trading nations sovereign flag for Māori people in 1835. And it was given the ensign by King George to acknowledge that. What had happened was, and this is, I'm explaining this because the political context of history is essential to understand, to put ourselves into context now with environmentalism. let alone social justice. So they're kind of here, they are one and the same. So this flag, sometimes it's called Hifakaputanga as well, just to shorten it. So that means it's a declaration of independence of the United Tribes of New Zealand. That's the translation of what I just said. This flag has a lot of representations, but within the picture, but what it meant was this was a sovereign nation, just like the British ensign, just like the American flag, the Dutch flag, the French flag, all flying around because they were colonists that were, you know, spinning around Aotearoa in their big bathtubs, looking for new lands and exploits and what have you, right? Resources and such. So when this flag was established, it was established because of Hifakaputanga, 1835. Now, Hifakaputanga, 1835, I'm giving you a little bit of an English version of it here, but we don't have such an issue with translation at this stage, but we're going to get there. So I have to, I mean, I'm compelled, but also I have to talk about this stuff in terms of Hifakaputanga and then Te Tiriti. So I know you guys may know of these things and these concepts, but I want to expand as much as I can in a short period of time and then move on. So in terms of Hifakaputanga, what was happening here is not just a declaration of independence, which it definitely, most definitely was, but it was also showing the foresight and political savvy of tangata whenua here, Māori, to establish themselves as sovereign in order to be able to enter into treat, right? So the idea is that they were declaring themselves, they were declaring their tino rangatiratanga, and that again is another concept that we're going to look at, which means not exactly sovereignty, but sovereignty is the closest definition that we can come up with for, you know, English definition for what tino rangatiratanga is. It means a lot more, but we'll leave it at that for now. So as you can see on the screen, there were four parts to Hifakaputanga. The first one was declaring their tino rangatiratanga, independence. The second one was saying that they were going to set up their own legislative branch called Te Whakamininga, and they were going to meet regularly. And that branch, the next part that says that branch was the only branch that was allowed to basically make decisions and give authority to make those decisions. That all was established and directed by Te Whakamininga, okay? And then the last part of this was basically a declaration to King George to say thank you for the protection and acknowledgement of our flag in return for protection and friendship, that type of thing, and giving sort of similar rights. Now, this was not a document or a declaration that was signed by Māori. It was declared, but this was agreed to by Hobson, who was the Crown's representative in Aotearoa at the time, and he sent it back to the king, who gave it the official seal, right? So this was set up, but it wasn't like, it's not a treaty, right? It's not any form of a treaty, it's a declaration, right? So this is part of our history. Now, fast forwarding now to 1840, as a lot of you guys know, we have Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Now, they are inextricably linked, but Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and you will hear me differentiate, and a lot of people, this is essential, a lot of people will differentiate between Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi because they are different. And that's the crux of what I'm trying to say to you at this point. But in terms of Te Tiriti, there were three parts, right? 3 articles of Te Tiriti. And if you don't know what those articles are, you share that company with a lot of people, but it's not a place where you really want to be. I want to send out my congratulations to the people who could very quickly and easily just rattle off what the 3 different articles are saying. But for those that don't, I'm just going to share quickly. I put up the Māori version because now we come into issues with translation. The biggest issue being that there was a Māori written Te Tiriti o Waitangi, there was an English translation of that Māori, and then there was a completely separate English version of the Treaty of Waitangi. And this division is what's created and been established and still carries on today. Our entire government is actually built on the premises based on the English version of the treaty. Now, although there were a few Māori that signed that, they only signed it because they didn't necessarily read English or Māori because it was an oral tradition, right? So they might have signed some of the English because of what people told them what it said, and they thought, oh, that sounds good, but it wasn't. So there's lots of, you know, questioning about how that happened. And there weren't very many that signed it, but the majority of the chiefs and the people as it traveled signed the Māori version, right? So what you see on the screen are the three articles of Te. And basically speaking, the first one talks about offering to the Queen what's called governorship. Now this is a huge word, because this word was totally unknown to Māori, right? They said, the English said, we want governorship. And the Māori said, okay, well, we'll make up a word for you. It's called kawanatanga. That's a transliteration for governorship. So it offers governorship, all governorship, to the subjects of the Queen of England and their land, right? The second article talks about tino rangatiratanga, all right? And this is the part where we're talking, it's close to sovereignty, but it's not exactly the same thing. And the important part about understanding how significant the second article is that it says, it talks about tino rangatiratanga over their land, their homes, and all their treasures. Like, all right, it says over there, o rātou whenua, rātou kāinga, me o rātou taonga katoa. And when you're talking about taonga, you guys know taongas are treasures, but it's a lot more than just that. We're talking about the language, we're talking about tikanga, we're talking about rivers and streams and mountains and the environment, all that type of stuff. Some of you guys would be familiar with the concept ko Aotearoa, ko te awa ko au. This is the type of thing that taonga means, because for Māori, there's no distinction. Like even in my pepeha, we're talking about, when we talk about these concepts, they're one and the same. Like, you know, an Indigenous person believes they are the same as the river, they're the same as the mountain, they're the same as the ocean. So when we have environmental destruction in those places, it's actually traumatic. Like it's more traumatic than a non-Indigenous person could probably understand, because the relationship is different. Now, that's my opinion, but we'll carry on. So that's why the second article is so significant, because it's talking about they have tino rangatiratanga, complete sovereignty is the closest definition, over their lands, their homes, and their taonga, all of them. So if that were the case, and the British actually who signed this, you know, Hobson signed it on behalf of the Queen, and they respected this, things would look very, very different in today. So the third one, I'll just go on to it. The third one talks about protection and equal rights as a citizen, as a Māori would have the same equal rights as a British person, a British subject would here in Aotearoa. So that's about more protection and that sort of thing. And I'll throw in a little bit of an Easter egg here. Again, some of you might know this, but there is actually a fourth article in Te Tiriti. Now, it wasn't actually written, but it is known that just before they signed, there was a priest that came in and wanted to add practice of religious freedoms and customs to go in there too. So Hobson was okay with that, but it wasn't scribbled in, but all the Māori and Hobson agreed to that too. So just a little extra fact, I call it a bonus fact, I don't know, something like that. So we've now just gone through the historical part, probably took too long on it, but you could go a lot longer. And you'll find that when you do Te Tiriti workshops and things like that, you'll learn heaps more about this, resources all over the place. But interestingly enough, when you look online, even me trying to get just copies to show you some pictures and stuff, they're kind of down the list when you're looking for Māori references and things like that. So we'll come back to that too, but this still happens today, where things are sort of swept under the rug a little bit. Like a lot of people, the reason why they don't have this history, they don't know this history, is because it hasn't been taught in schools, and that's intentional. So 2020 this year is when we've just now legally put through Parliament that Māori history is going to be taught in schools. Why it took this long is pretty obvious. It's because a history forgotten is a history that can be manipulated, which is exactly where we find ourselves today with the English version of the Treaty of Waitangi. So moving on from there, it's bringing us back into this modern framework, okay? I just want to see what my next slide is. Oh, so these are just some examples, like as I said, when we were in the North, partnership working together on anti-mining campaigns. The picture in the upper right was, I was actually sent by the Ahipara Takutaimona Committee with another member to do some work about looking at the marine environment and power stocks and things like that, how they did it in Kaitahu, and bringing that information back to Māori. So I was, put in a position that I was available to help bring some information from one place to the other and sort of report back, that type of thing. But really where I want to get to is, aside from hikois and obviously hikois, there's a picture here of Moana Jackson talking to us. That was a anti-TPPA hikoi. What you generally find, and the reason why these things tend to go this way, is one, Te Tiriti. This is probably the most important thing I'll say in the whole discussion. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is the key to environmentalism in Aotearoa, because if people are brought to honor Te Tiriti, this is why you see the signs, it's inherent that they have to give tino rangatiratanga to Māori over their lands, homes, and taonga, which means the environment. And so if it was accepted and acknowledged and honored, we would see a very, very different environmental landscape than we do today. So just moving on from these things here, I'll come back to this slide, but what I want to do is talk about the modern framework of where we are in Aotearoa. So one really, really good resource that people could potentially look at, they've probably heard of it before. It is a long document, but it's called Matike Mai Aotearoa, and that is a constitutional framework that was most recently done in the last, say, 7 or 8 years. But over a period of years, there were several prominent Māori that were involved, including being led by Moana Jackson, Margaret Mutu. My wife, Catherine, was involved in that as well. It was reported officially in 2016. So it's been around for a while, but you don't hear very much about it. So if you don't know about it, go look it up. Matike Mai Aotearoa. I'm going to reference everything at the end of my slide thing, so you'll be able to see that there as well. So that's a modern framework of how things could look, right? And it's inspirational, because in Aotearoa, we don't, or New Zealand even, we don't have an official constitution, right? So this is about transformation. It's about how we could exist if we only had something to fall back on that was a pathway for us that was multicultural, let alone bicultural. So now coming back to where we are in the modern age, I have this thing on the screen that talks about decolonization, right? There's lots of different things that we can do, and some of the things I mentioned, and so you can take notes or whatever. But in terms of how we act as active allies, because there are people out there who want to be allies but don't know how, or think they are, but they're overstepping their bounds. So it's really important to sort of look at how we can do that a little bit better, I think. And hopefully there's some information here that will benefit some people, right? So it's important, again, to understand when we talk about colonization, what we're talking about is the entire purpose of colonization is the purpose of acquisition by force, by theft, by the gun, and using cultural and racial oppression by submission. So this was a driving force that was even allowed, so to speak. It was suggested and created through heads of state, the church. You've got these things called the papal bulls, which were written by the King of Portugal to basically go and conquer lands in the name of Christianity. It doesn't matter if someone's there or not. You know, that's just how it was back then from Europe. So all Western systems, the current systems that we live in as well, have evolved from and by these colonial decrees, which is a little bit crazy, but that's we don't necessarily see the links because nobody cares about the links anymore. They don't want you to care about the links anymore. But neoliberalism is a direct result of these papal bulls and the absolute steamrolling push of colonialism, colonization to grab resources, right? So based on that fact, what I want to do is look at ways that we can break that down and instill in ourselves a better understanding of what it's like to be at the sharp end of that spear and how we can make ourselves more available to environmental activism when it's led from a cultural perspective. Because in Aotearoa, to be perfectly honest, that's where it has to come from. And it hasn't, well, it has been, but in the background. So moving on from there, I am going to borrow, we're going to sit on this screen for a while, but I'm going to borrow this from someone named Kalayan Mendoza, who is a Filipino activist, a queer activist who has set up this 10-point, it's actually 10 points. I got the 10th one on another screen, but I like using this as a framework for how things would work here. So I really actually want to go through these one by one. relatively quickly because they're all very, very useful. So just doing that, the first one, we see it on the screen, hopefully you can read it. If not, it says listening to and following the community. Find out who the traditional owners and elders of the land you are on. When doing long-term work on Indigenous rights, build strong relationships within the community and make sure everything is Indigenous led. So what this basically means is you've got to yield space to Indigenous environmentalists, right? These are the kaitiaki of Aotearoa. There is a lot of heat around that kupu, that word. Most Māori will tell you, if not all, that if you do not have the whakapapa to that word, you are not a kaitiaki. You can be an environmentalist, you can be an activist, you can be whatever you want, but steer clear of that kupu in terms of labeling yourself or anything you're involved in unless someone is talking to you or about you, okay? So I think that's quite important to it. It's about having the whakapapa to use that word and that reo, right? Again, a whole nother wānanga, a whole nother study series could happen on that concept alone, right? So we are talking about within these communities that they have what's called, what's the word? It's, there's an intergenerational trauma. That's the word I was trying to come up with. And that's real. They're going through stages of grief, and you don't have any idea through that upbringing and that history what that's like. So you have to tread very, very carefully, right? And it's okay if you don't know to say you don't know. That's totally fine. But don't expect people to just open up and share everything with you, right? So moving on to number 2, we've got to center the stories around the community. So this is a very similar to, you know, raising Indigenous voices, that type of thing. But we're talking about the fact that this is not about us, it's about the Indigenous people. So, I mean, that's basically what that says. I don't have to read it verbatim, but you get the idea. You're about helping their voice, not putting yourself up in the front or you know, if people push you in a position, then that's a different story. If they ask you for something, then that's a different story. But don't think that you're being the savior, and that's coming in number 8 anyways. Moving on to number 3, we just talked a little bit about this one, where we skimmed the surface, but knowing the historical and the cultural context, right? I mean, I can't stress it enough. If we don't know as immigrants, let alone as, you know, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th generation Kiwis, whatever it is, about the actual history of Aotearoa and New Zealand as a nation, including the relationship and the wehinga, the division between Māori and non-Māori, Māori and Pākehā in this case, we are ignorant to all the effects of that disassociation and that displacement. We're totally ignorant of that. So you have to be knowledgeable in the history to get that context. I just can't stress that enough, right? So, and that's not something you get by reading a book, just one book, or, you know, say, oh, even if you say, I know the 3 articles of Tatititi, you need to understand what that means to people and all the history before, after, not all, but you need to understand it from a perspective that isn't yours, which isn't the easiest thing in the world. But first, get your own perspective on it, have a perspective. And I mentioned that you would be in some company. I don't know if anyone saw, I think it was just a few days ago or last week, someone actually approached Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, and somehow they got in there to the point where they could ask a question. And they challenged her and asked her, do you know what the Article 2 says in Te Tiriti or Waitangi? Or roughly, and she was like, I'm not at liberty to, or I can't talk about that right now. Roughly speaking, could you tell me? And she completely skirted the issue because it wasn't available to her just to say, well, it's about this, but let's move on. Even your Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, couldn't actually come to the table with just something so simple, but so quintessential and important. So, like I said, I'm not going to say you're in good company, but there's a lot of company in that place that don't know or understand Te Tiriti. Okay, number 4, never showing up empty-handed. To me, this is in terms of koha. So koha can be, obviously, some of us understand that as money, but it's not just money. Back in the day, it wasn't money at all. At modern age, we look at that. So for organizations like Greenpeace, it might include that. But also, and more importantly, we're talking about time and energy. It's about the added value, right? What you're bringing to what you're bringing to the party, basically. And it can't be nothing, right? It's got to be something. Otherwise, what's the point of being there? Okay. I'm not reading through each of these verbatim because you can see them, but you get the idea. Number 5, always seeking consent and permission. So this is starting to get into the whole concept of you know, you can define things, but don't appropriate them. Appropriation is a big issue. We see it nowadays. It's been happening for a long time, but now I think it's just communication in the world. You get to see it a little bit more accurately and immediately. Don't appropriate someone else's culture. It's as simple as that. The things that I've done as a non-Māori have only been because I've been invited to do them. And in a lot of cases, it's a very fine line that I walk, because of all the invites and the appreciation or the acknowledgement of people by saying, here, please take my children across the Pacific Ocean for, you know, periods of time and, you know, major weather. Although that is, to me, that's an acknowledgement of people having trust in me. That doesn't mean that every Māori is going to like it. And there are plenty that don't. Plenty that don't even necessarily like me for who I am, for what I do. But I can't stop from a couple of opinions based on a whole lot of other opinions that are supporting me and that, you know, are pushing me into the, or giving me assistance into these positions that I've had in the past. So there's always going to be detractors, is what I'm saying. But that's the same in activism in general. So where was I? Number 6, right? So when we're talking about being responsible, don't drain resources. These are kind of common things we know, but they're things that we need to take into these spaces, right? We want to be beneficial, and we want to make things work, and we want to be helpful, but we don't want to take. Like, you don't need a minder. And that's a big reason, actually, why I believe why I'm giving this discussion today, because sure, we could call someone who's Māori and say, yep, please come in and talk to us. But the reality is that we can do this ourselves as tauiwi, as Pākehā, as non-Māori, so that we can sort of organize, get our skill sets together, and then go and spread out into places where we might be of service to Māori, Indigenous, environmental kaupapa. So we can do this ourselves. We don't have to drain them and their time, because I guarantee you Māori are burnt out, a lot of them. Not all of them, but when you have to deal with environmental issues, your tribal issues, and all this injustice, social, environmental, and otherwise political, because everything is a political act these days, it gets very tiring. It's a lot to put on your shoulders. So the idea is to try and take some of that burden off. You know, that's about being responsible, at least to me. 7, knowing when to step back. If someone brings you forward, that's great, but try and get out of there as quickly as possible. Or if you don't know something, or you're not, you know, the authoritative position to speak on it, pass the mic. You know, like, say, if someone asks you a question that has anything to do with Te Ao Māori, if there's a Māori around, then maybe say, well, maybe that's a question for this person, you know, and that type of thing. The idea is not to take that limelight. And I've seen it happen where people are really keen to stand up and say they support Māori rights and Indigenous rights, and it's really important, and Te pretty much a lot of the stuff that I'm saying now, but it was in a space where we need to get work done, you know? So we don't need someone grandstanding to explain how great of an ally they are. We need someone to stand up when they're asked to stand up, and as soon as they're finished, go back and make yourself useful. Go wash some dishes in the kota, whatever it might be, you know, go sweep the floor. So yeah, definitely know when to stand back, which is most of the time on Indigenous environmental issues. So a part of this is, the reasoning for this is because what's good for Māori is good for everyone. Because again, when you ask Māori if they're going to look after their, you know, their lands, their homes, and their taonga, that includes the environment. And 99% of Māori will be doing what they can to look after that sort of stuff. Okay, moving on. Number 8, it's pretty self-explanatory. Don't be the white savior, you know. It's, again, more of standing back, that type of stuff. What was I going to say? Turn up and do stuff. Make the sacrifice to, you know, put in your hard work, but don't expect anything in return, because you're not there based on expectation. You're there to offer and to give. That's that koha. A lot of these are, you know, interchangeable, right? They have a lot of similarities in different things. Right now, the reason why we need to have these, you know, step back and allow Māoris to stand up, and they've been doing this, don't get me wrong, this has been happening in the background for 100 years, right? Plenty of examples of Māori who are Indigenous activists, but you may not hear about them because they're not funded, they're not getting screen time, they're not a big, massive international organization like Greenpeace. So there are Indigenous networks all around the world that are fighting and dying, like being murdered, right? And I mention that because there are people that we need to understand. You've got the likes of Macio Pereira dos Santos in Brazil, who's been recently murdered last year. You've got Berta Cáceres, sorry, Samir Flores. There's a whole lot of Indigenous activists all over the world. I think there's something like over 200 in the last 10 years alone have been murdered because they're fighting for their lands or an environmental cause. We don't talk about them because we don't sometimes know to, but they exist and they're being murdered, they're being tortured, they're being raped, and they're putting their bodies on the line. So the least we can do is acknowledge them, right? So that's really, really important. Greenpeace would have a relationship, a way to understand that is maybe in terms of Fernando Pereira, who was the photographer, a lot of you guys know, who was killed on the Rainbow Warrior when it was bombed. We often acknowledge him and recognize him because he was killed by an act of terrorism, and it was environmentalism that he was working towards. But it's a similar context. I won't say it's the same, but be aware of these people, be aware that this is happening, and step back because they're putting their bodies on the line. Yes, so finally we got 9, be mindful of the energy. Obviously, we're talking about Indigenous burnout, the tragedies that people suffer, the trauma that is intergenerational that they carry, because a lot of these things have not been resolved, right? I'm not going to get into the concept of treaty settlements and all that type of stuff, but there is ongoing trauma from things that have happened in the past that people haven't gotten over yet because it's hard to get over. And even when you have things like treaty settlements, when you are capping it at 1% to 3% and you are forcing people to agree to full and final, you know, the words full and final at the end, that's not enough. That's not justice. And there's a lot of Māori that won't even agree to the process because it's completely unjust. It's Māori, once again, having to subsidize the nation financially through a very pittance or small bit of a settlement. Again, another wānanga for another time. Lastly, this one kind of fits all the other ones in together. Don't do harm to the community, right? We're supposed to make things better by being in these spaces than worse. And you have to, if you're going to be called out, and it's happened to me, I've made mistakes. I guarantee you I've made mistakes. When it happens, you just got to do your best to improve. Sometimes you're going to get called out, and the best thing to do is, rather than, you know, try and support your cause or justify or whatever, take a step back, do some introspection, and try and figure out if there's a way that you could have done something better, maybe something you can learn from that experience. And oftentimes you'll find that you need to change, like your approach is wrong or something like that. So just be open to that. That's really, really important, okay? Other than that, I was going to talk about, I mean, we're running out of time. I was going to talk about a couple of things in terms of Greenpeace. I only really had one example as an example of something good and an example of something not so good. So in terms of the good, we'll start with the good. The pictures on the screen are from 2011 when I did some contract work as a skipper, bringing a vessel out to the Raukumara Basin. We were fighting Petrobras, who was doing deep sea oil exploration out off of the East Cape, the Raukumara Basin. And I want to say that in that sense, in that particular example, Greenpeace did the best they could to acknowledge the people of the land, which was Te Whānau Apanui, and to work within their tikanga, their lifestyle. And it was, for the most part, it wasn't perfect, but for the most part, it was an excellent partnership between Tangata Whenua and Pākehā, or tauiwi, or whatever you want to call it, or Greenpeace as an organization. One of the issues was that was stated by Māori was that there wasn't enough Māori, basically what happened is Greenpeace was getting a lot of publicity, right? And that happens because, again, they're international. That's what media outlets do. So for me, being in that situation, one of the things I thought of is how can we get a little bit more Māori exposure from Te Whānau Apanui. So one of those photos you can see is I actually went to the Runanga offices while we were there and said, hey, is it possible that you guys would have some resources that I could help to make Te Whānau Apanui signs, like an insignia or something, and we could put it out on the boats, you know? Because we had all these boats with Greenpeace signs and whatever, but there was nothing out there that's saying Te Whānau Apanui. They thought it was a great idea. They thought it was worthwhile. There's 2 of us. One guy came in and helped us. We got screens, we put it up, we made these flags, that's what that is, and we put it out on the Māori fishing boat, which was captained by Elvis Teddy. And Elvis went out there and said, I won't be moving. I'm doing some fishing. These are my traditional lands. And of course, he was arrested and laws were changed because they didn't have the legal right to go in there and arrest him, but they had to change the law to make it legal. So there's been a big case. But the point I'm trying to make is that Greenpeace was doing their best to work alongside Te Whanau Apanui. And you can see in the report when Petrobras eventually left that they did cite Indigenous, I don't think it was Indigenous resistance, but local resistance or something like that. And that's totally Te Whanau Apanui. But Greenpeace was good to come in there with resources, with koha, with ideas, and to try and support them. And it worked out really, really well, I thought. So it wasn't perfect, but it was good. There were some crazy experiences where people from Greenpeace were learning tikanga for the first time. I don't have time for the stories, but they were there. In terms of seeing what a tangihanga is for the first time and being completely out of place, but trusting and following in the tikanga. And it was really good to see that they were willing to do that. This was the result, you know, we had Māori and Pākehā working together. It was an awesome experience and it was successful. So that's a good example. A bad example, some of you guys might remember this, I don't know, I'm sure at least most of you might. This was a good example of how not to do things. I'm not sitting here bagging on Greenpeace, but all that had to happen in this particular situation back in 2014 was if these international Māori activists, international Greenpeace activists, they just had to ask someone there, because right away someone would have told them that's a no-no, that's a cultural site that's historically and culturally significant. You cannot walk there, you cannot go there. But instead, it was like a culture of imposition rather than proposition. They just bowled right in because they were having the talks nearby, put something next to something that was recognizable, but completely takahiat mana. They trampled the mana of the indigenous people in Peru. Don't do stuff like this, I guess is the easiest way to put it. So based on those examples, there are ways to work together. It is a very, very complicated road ahead, but it's possible to make these things work together. But you have to understand that even though Greenpeace has this massive presence in a lot of places overseas and in New Zealand for environmental issues, there are people who have been doing it well before them that are still doing it, that are getting no screen time, no knowledge, no acknowledgement, nothing. So what we need to do is, that's totally unweighted in the scales. Not only do we need to balance, but we need to overweight to make up for the loss. So we need to propel and lift up these indigenous voices. That's what it actually means. So there are people who do that. Greenpeace has two people that have been employed for them, Mike Smith and Hinika Mako. And we've worked with them for a long time. We go way back, Mike and myself and Catherine and Hinika. We've seen them do things like, as another good example, I might as well give it, is going to Norway to present at Statoil's AGM. And that was, Mike and Hinika went as Indigenous people, but they were quietly funded or supported by Greenpeace New Zealand, because again, what's good for Māori is good for the environment, which is good for New Zealanders. So these are the type of things that we're just touching the surface on how to be a better active ally, not just, you know, it's like, don't just be not racist, be anti-racist. It's the same type of concept. Don't just be an ally, be an active ally. And understanding that although that is a little bit tricky to walk, you have to go there with humility, but keep being active in your study and that type of thing. Now, I've talked probably a little bit longer than I want to, but the last slide I want to show you is possibly something you've seen before, but this is what and why, particularly the main reason why Māori are fighting. Not the only reason, but it's a really important one. So I think if I can make this work, I don't know if people have seen this before, but all this is a GIF example of what's happened to Aotearoa since pre-1840 until now. And all that disappearing black was all Māori land. And this is the process of colonization that they're fighting against, you know. And that's not just land, that's rivers, that's lakes, that's air quality, that's fertile soils, all this type of stuff in environmentalism, you know, what we put into an environmentalism bubble. But, you know, there's an expression that, you know, talks about, you know, as long as the land stands, so do the people, right? But what happens when all this land is being taken? So I'm gonna end it there, and I don't know if there's time or not for questions. I'll leave that up to Abby. I haven't looked at any of the chat in case there was questions put in there. So aroha mai, I haven't done that. Stop sharing the screen. Right. Hey, oh, sorry. So Abby, I see a question there now. Can I go to that question? Is that all right? Have we got time?
Yeah, if people are happy for it to go a couple minutes over, I'm totally happy with that. If people need to leave, by all means, then I fully understand. But yeah, go for it. Would you like me to
So
read it out to you?
yes,
Or
please give me a break.
okay. Kia ora, Jef. Awesome Carrero. Could I ask your advice on starting a campaign on an environmental issue which you perceive as being an issue which is not currently being spoken of or worked on from an Indigenous Maori perspective? Being conscious also of Maori having a lot of issues, social, political, and environmental, they're actively working to overcome all at once.
Okay, so this is just, I mean, off the cuff. There will be issues that one person or several people might find incredibly important, and I'm only just throwing out an example here because I don't know what the specific issue is here, but let's say veganism, you know, like there are people who are absolutely like passionate. I don't know what else, you know, the words that you could come up with, but they're very, very strong into this concept of veganism being, you know, a main answer to the environmental trauma that we have around us. If you want to start a campaign and involve Māori in that campaign or Indigenous people in another place, the first step is to go to them and say, I'm interested in raising this issue. First of all, has any Indigenous or Māori person brought this issue up? Because maybe you can't go and Google it, but Māori might actually know several people who are involved in that kaupapa or interested in it, so on and so forth. So the first thing is find out if there actually is an issue, because just because it ain't on Google doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So, and if it is, then you have a pathway to find that person, talk to them, and see what's being done and see if you can lend support. Because even though you want to start the issue, there's a good chance that it may have been started before you. And if it hasn't been, the next thing is, and that might take a while to find out that there is no one out there who's brought this up. The next issue would be that if you do want to bring it up, if it's going to be a political issue and it involves Māori, you need to ask Māori if they're willing to offer you some guidance as to how to approach that issue. Asking questions like, who do you think might be good people to speak to? Is there an audience for this? How do you feel about it? You know, is this something that's important to you as Māori? And you may find that it might be important, but it also might be less important than other issues that are ongoing and more in the forefront. And maybe someone else might have the opinion that, like a Māori might have the opinion that these other issues are overarching that one, even if you don't agree. So I guess that would be my best answer to that question. I mean, we're speaking in terms of generalities, but hopefully that's a start. I mean, maybe that stuff seems a little bit obvious. I mean, hopefully it does. It's obvious to me, but yeah, you know, this is the thing, like just running in and starting a campaign, we see that happening. Like, for example, and I'm not going to talk badly about it, but you have a large international campaign like Extinction Rebellion. We've got some members of Extinction Rebellion listening in here. I'm a part of that as well. But right from the start, what a lot of us saw was a campaign that's been imported from like a colonial place and sort of just thrown into Aotearoa without any real understanding of Indigenous social justice, environmental justice, so on and so forth. So, but they're very, very open to understanding and learning about that, and to the point where a tangata whenua and allies network was established to help advise and work and lift Indigenous voices, which is what Extinction Rebellion all unanimously pretty much agreed to doing at their week of action last year. So in terms of being a new or fresh import or idea or campaign, it's about working with those links and making those connections first and foremost. That's really important. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but I've done my best to try. But I'm open to more questions, or if that's us, or if there's questions later, or someone wants to talk to me later, I'm happy to talk off the Zoom, so we don't keep everyone here forever.
Great, thank you so much, Jef. Yeah, we are at 5 o'clock. However, there is an email address that you can send any questions to. Sens will pop it in the chat. It's our getinvolved@greenpeace.email, and then I can forward them on to Jef, and we can make sure that we get answers for you. And if you're interested in further discussions about on any particular topics that we went through today, then by all means, I'm happy to pass those requests and those messages on, Jef. So please feel free to do that. I thank you. I can't say thanks enough, Jef, for spending this time with us this afternoon. It was absolutely fantastic. I personally found it really helpful. And I don't know as well if you would mind sharing the presentation that you put together, because particularly those 10 points that you shared, I think would be really good. I'm just thinking us like Greenpeace, I would be really happy for us in the mobilization space to just constantly be referring to that, because I think it's just really brings up incredibly important thoughts for us. And we're working hard to get better. And you shared a lot of information today that will hopefully help us in that journey. So
absolutely. And I ended it just before the last screen, which is, you know, referencing that type of stuff. So, I mean, if people know how to screenshot, do a screenshot, you know, like a lot of this stuff is, you know, like the article that I used from Kalai on Mendoza, that article is in here. It's an Amnesty International piece, but it was developed through his work. But also there's other things that might be useful. There's a link here to, like, there's a Facebook page called Tauiwi Mo Matiki Mai, which obviously it's good to maybe read the report, which is available online as well. I believe there's a link to that. Yep, there's a link to that PDF on this as well. It's the 4th one down. But you can then go onto social media and see how, as tauiwi, can I help to support this constitutional transformation that's being led by Indigenous voices. There's also lots of other things about consultation, good practice with tangata whenua, that type of stuff. I put an article down the bottom there as well. That type of, oh, the article talks specifically about how the Waitangi Tribunal found that Māori did not cede sovereignty, right? Because this is what the tribunal was designed for, and that was 1975, land marches, the beginning of that. See, there's all these historical contexts that I either have not mentioned or skimmed over, because what do you expect to fit in 45 minutes? But do your research, look at some of these things here, and like I say, I'm happy to share this. You know, I can take out the pictures of me and share the other stuff, but all the citing is theoretically here for this last 45 minutes.
Thank you so much, Jef. So I just want to close this week by again acknowledging all of you who've come to spend your afternoons with us today. Thank you so very much for giving your time and energy to this kaupapa. And we very much look forward to hopefully working with you all and seeing you all in the future, whether it's on one of these calls or face to face. Kia ora koutou. Have a fantastic evening, everybody.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Thank you very much.
I mean, just before, I guess there is a request that if you can actually copy those links and share it in the chat so people can copy them. Is that possible?
It probably is. So let me see how I can do that. Let's see. Actually, probably what's easier, rather than doing that, can I send them to Abby and we can share them maybe underneath, you know, the recording or something like that? That would probably work, eh?
That would be good. Yeah, we can share it. Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
awesome.
Hopefully that's enough for everyone.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming and joining us today. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for organizing and your time, guys. Well, yeah, good night. We'll see you next.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jef. Thanks, Abby. And thanks, Sense.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Tell me when it's set to walk.
Yeah, go ahead. I can't even see it.
Ended. The Zoom ended.
I feel like, funnily enough, I feel like as the speaker, I'm just sort of waiting for everyone to go, because I don't want
I know we
maybe
always kind of
thing, I don't know, but I'm just sort of, oh, well, when is it okay to go? Normally it's, thanks for coming, everyone goes on. Are you guys sticking around for something, or is everyone just leaving now?
No, we're just waiting to say bye.
Okay. Right. Well, hopefully people don't find it rude, but I'm gonna go.
Yeah, go for it. Thank you so much, Jef. That was amazing, honestly.
Hopefully
really appreciate your time.
We'll see. I'm probably gonna go watch it later and be like, oh, but you know, it's a start. So we'll see how we go. Thanks, Sens. I appreciate your time as well.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Yeah, bye. Have a good evening, Jef. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem, Sens. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend, eh?
Yeah.